Hello and welcome to In the Classroom, an educational podcast making teaching and learning more transparent. My name is Benjamin Stewart at benjaminlstewart.org, and today's July 8th, 2021. Today I want to talk about using the term student versus using the term learner, and if it means anything, if it implies or points to a particular type of educational philosophy that one might have. I want to get into the weeds a little bit using these two terms from a teacher perspective or a trainer, coach, if it really matters, and what can we gather by reflecting a bit on these two terms. Before we get into that, if you have any insights, any opinions, thoughts on today's topic, feel free to reach out to me at my Twitter handle, BNLEEZ. You can also join the Discord community by accessing the link at my website at benjaminlstewart.org if you want to also voice an opinion. Today I want to get into using these two terms based on some conversations and some reflections I had this past semester. I was teaching a course called Thesis Seminar, which is a course designed to help English language teacher trainers pursue a research project regarding applied linguistics, basically looking at a topic related to applied linguistics and developing their own research project that includes a literature review, a method section for collecting the data and analyzing it, and also then presenting results at the end of the semester. This past semester, I had one student who was looking at two different groups of participants. One group who were taking courses, language courses, formally at an institution with an instructor, and a second group, individuals or learners who were basically studying on their own an additional language. So they were studying informally with no teacher. And my student wanted to compare these two groups of students. And I remember having a conversation with the student about what to call these two. In fact, she had determined to call the students who were enrolled in a class at an institution who were taking courses formally as students. And the second group, she had chosen to call the learners who were not studying formally as learners. And I remember having a conversation with the student suggesting that perhaps that she chose a different term to describe both of these two groups of participants to make it a little bit clear. I remember thinking at the time how I tend to use both of these terms interchangeably, but I also realize that over time, I tend to be using the term learners more frequently, even though I'm referring to students who are signed up formally to my classes, which is in my own context. So at the end of the semester, the students are asked to present their findings and as they deliver their oral defense, and this particular student chose not to take my advice, which is perfectly fine, and she referred to these two groups of participants as students and learners. Part of the oral defense includes examiners, colleagues of mine, who are also giving feedback to the students. And one colleague, I remember commenting on the clarity of using these two terms, students and learners, and for him, the distinguishing between these two groups using these terms was very clear. I still remember thinking, even at that time, I wasn't convinced of using these two terms to best distinguish between one group of students who were taking courses formally versus another group of students who were not. And even in this podcast, you find that you see me going back and forth in the terms that I use between using the term student versus using the term learner. So that's kind of the genesis of today's topic. I wanted to kind of unpack and dive in a little bit deeper into these two terms and see if there's any reflection, if there's anything here regarding whether or not using one term over the other is an indicator of how we look at teaching and learning. So I'm going to bring up here some definitions. I was looking online and wanted to first look at each of these terms prescriptively, looking at it abstractly and how we define these two terms. And if we look at the term student, we have basically two definitions. The first being a person formally engaged in learning, especially one enrolled in school or in college, a pupil. So a student at Yale is given here as an example. So here, this indicates clearly an individual in a formal learning context, one who's enrolled in a course, and by my own student probably choosing this definition for her research. Now, there's a second definition here: any person who studies, investigates, and examines thoughtfully. In the second definition, there's an example here: a student of human nature. This was the second definition that kept coming to mind, thinking of, well, I'm a student of something. For me, indicates not just a formal context, but more broadly speaking, just a desire or, looking at autonomous learning in a way that it's really just driven by the student. And maybe there's not an instructor involved at all. I think the second definition here points more towards informal type of context, although it doesn't necessarily mean that it can mean both. And I think at the end of the day, for me, student and learning, there is a mix between formal and informal learning, right? Regardless of the term that's being used in my own particular context and the way that I look at teaching and learning, I think always there's a combination of a formality there in terms of just the going to school and having an instructor and receiving grades and giving grades and so on, versus taking some of the qualities of informal learning and trying to incorporate as many of those as possible within the formal. So again, just kind of breaking down that divider between formal and informal. If we look up, or if we consider a definition for learning, pull that up here, we see it's also kind of ambiguous. It's not really clear when we think about or consider the definition for a learner. The first definition here, someone who is learning something, a beginner. Now, this is interesting. The definition including the word beginner, whereas I guess assuming that once someone who is not a beginner is less of a learner, I think that was it's a strange, I think, thing to include in a definition. Just if we're open to the idea of lifelong learning, and I thought that was interesting to include in the definition. The second definition for learner states a school pupil. So now we have, again, kind of a difference between formal and informal educational situations. And so I don't think we're any clear by looking at these two definitions, which one really points towards a formal context versus an informal context. And again, I keep thinking about my own particular use of the term. I know in my writing, I definitely will lean towards the term learner over student. Probably in the way I speak, it's probably more mixed, but I know that I have, over time, kind of gravitated more towards the term learner over student. But either way, again, as I mentioned before, I don't think it reflects all that much to the different educational philosophy that I have. You know, I can easily feel comfortable referring to the individuals who are enrolled in my courses as students and still have this same philosophy of bringing in informal learning context or strategies and trying to incorporate those into a formal situation. Now, I was also curious. I went to Google Trends, and I found this was also interesting. If we do a comparison, if you go to Google Trends and you compare the term students, plural, and learners, plural, it's pretty much the same whether singular, plural, but it's interesting that the use of the term students, by far, it's used much more often than the term learners. And if we look at the two terms, and with Google Trends, you can also rank it by country, there's a cultural element here in terms of which term tends to be used more frequently. If we go to the ranking, the term learner is used quite often. The United States is ranked 19th in terms of using the term using the term student over learner. But it looks like here, according to Google Trends, there's a ratio of 94% to 6% looking at the term student over the term learners. That is, students is used by far more often, 94% over 6% for the term learners. Now, I'm located in Mexico. I was curious if there's any difference there, and they're ranked 30th, 92% to 8%, right, when we compare the use of the term students over the term learners. So again, slight difference, but still highly favored using the word students over the word learners. Now, I was curious to see which countries used the term learners, or maybe where there was more of an equal balance between the two terms. And the top three countries, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia, tend to use the term learners more frequently. The ratio students over the learners is 59% to 41%. So 59% the term students is used, 41% the term learners is used. If we compare that to New Zealand, 70% over 30% student to learner, and Australia, 72% over 28%. So I just thought it was interesting to draw some comparison between these different countries. I think there is a cultural element to how the terms are being used. Now, you could argue, well, does this mean that these countries, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia, are more open to a more informal situation, or maybe certain strategies that are more associated with informal learning or more often used, maybe even in the schools? That's hard to say. Just by the definition of these two terms and the vagueness of these two, it's really hard to say. But it is interesting to see that there is some differences here by country when you're looking at the frequency of these two terms. Now, I was talking about, how the terms, whether or not they can influence one's educational philosophy. And I was thinking of the linguistic relativism, determinism, and thinking about what kind of influence does language have over our thoughts, or does the language that we use just reflect our thoughts regardless, right? And again, I go back to my own example. Whether I use the word students or learners doesn't influence or dictate or reflect my educational philosophy. I feel like my educational philosophy is set in the sense of that I feel I have certain beliefs in the way that, and reasons and rationales for what I do in the classroom. And whether or not I choose to use the word student or learners. I don't think that has a major impact, or I don't think it reveals all that much about my own particular philosophy. But I'm curious what others think about this. I'm curious about what other teachers, how they use these terms. If they found that over time, are they using one term over another? Has there been any kind of switch or change over time in terms of these, the ways in which you refer to those who are studying with you, who are under your direction in terms of the classes that you teach? So I think we'll stop there. I just wanted to bring this up. If you have any thoughts on the matter, feel free to reach out to me via Twitter. If you want to be part of the Discord discussion, again, feel free to contact or access the link, I should say, at my website at benjaminlstewart.org. And we'll stop there for now. This has been In the Classroom, an educational podcast, making teaching and learning more transparent. Thanks for listening.